Sarah had never known fear like this. The alien warrior had fought many battles, stood face to face with beasts larger than her own ship, and faced certain death countless times. But nothing compared to the terror she felt now. She was trapped, captured by humans. The humans had taken her during an intense skirmish between their forces and the alien empire she served. She had been one of the few survivors. Her ship struck down, and her crew lost. Now she was aboard a human vessel, their ship's cold metal walls towering over her. She tried to make sense of the situation, but her mind raced with confusion and fear. The humans had a reputation. They were known across the stars for their brutal ways. Stories of their ruthlessness were common in the galaxy. They were not a species to be underestimated, and they didn't leave their enemies alive if they could avoid it. They weren't like the other peaceful species she'd encountered. Sarah had heard the rumors. Humans often captured their enemies, treating them as prizes of war, sometimes to be eaten or used for strange rituals. She had no idea which one would be her fate, but her instincts screamed that it would be something terrible. Zara was locked in a small, windowless room, her hands bound to the walls with restraints that held her in place. Her muscles ached from the long journey and the struggle, but it was the feeling of helplessness that gnawed at her the most. She could feel the eyes of the humans watching her, their cold stares through the small viewing window on the door. "Get ready, Sarah," she muttered to herself, trying to calm the chaos in her mind. Humans are savages. Whatever comes next, it won't be easy. Her alien physiology made her different from the humans, stronger, faster, more resilient. But that didn't matter now. She had no weapon, no backup. She was a prisoner on a strange ship in the middle of nowhere, with no way of knowing how the humans would treat her. A door slid open, and the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. Sarah tensed, expecting the worst. She steeled herself for whatever was coming, whether it was death, torture, or something worse. The footsteps stopped, and then the door opened with a soft hiss. A human stood there, tall, with a serious expression. His uniform was different from the others she had seen, the insignia on his chest unfamiliar to her. The human captain was no ordinary soldier. Sarah could tell by the way he held himself. There was a calmness about him, an almost unsettling serenity. "You're awake," the man said in a deep voice, his accent strange but understandable. Sarah narrowed her eyes. This was it, the moment she'd been dreading. The human would either threaten her or treat her as nothing more than a meal. She prepared herself for whatever was about to happen. She had to stay strong. The human stepped into the room, studying her with keen eyes. He didn't move to harm her. Instead, he walked over to the small table near the corner, placing a tray of food in front of her. Zara's eyes flicked to the tray. It was food. Real food, not the strange concoctions she had expected. There was meat, vegetables, and even something that smelled sweet. This wasn't the kind of food she had anticipated. She had thought humans might feed her something to weaken her, something toxic or vile. But this was normal. She glanced back at the human captain, confusion crossing her face. You're giving me food?" she asked, her voice hoarse from the long silence. The human captain looked at her with a hint of sympathy, then nodded. "Yes," he said calmly. "You need sustenance. I won't harm you. You've been through enough already." Zara's mind struggled to comprehend his words. She had expected the human to treat her like an object, something to break or consume. But instead, he seemed to care for her well-being, offering something she hadn't anticipated. "You expect me to eat?" she asked, her voice filled with skepticism. She had never met a human who seemed this calm, this normal. This was not how the stories went. "Yes," the captain said, his voice firm yet gentle. "You're not our enemy. You're a prisoner, yes, but that doesn't mean we should treat you like an animal. You're a person. You deserve better than that." Zara stared at him, trying to make sense of his words. What kind of human was this? She had heard so much about the barbaric nature of humans. They were supposed to be cruel, aggressive, everything her people had been warned about. Yet this man, this human captain, wasn't like that at all. Why? Sarah asked, still wary. Why are you treating me this way? I expected. She couldn't even bring herself to finish the sentence. She had expected death, pain, or humiliation. But this human, this stranger, was offering something different. The captain stood silently for a moment before replying, his eyes never leaving hers. Because not all of us are the same, he said quietly. We're not all savage. We're capable of kindness, and I believe you deserve better than what you expect. Zara didn't know what to think. She was a warrior, trained for battle, not for moments like this. The thought of sitting down to eat with her captor was absurd, but there was no violence, no threat, just a quiet sincerity. Zara slowly reached for the food. She didn't know what to expect, but for the first time in hours, she felt a small spark of hope. Maybe this human wasn't the monster she had been told about. Maybe there was something more to humanity than the stories. And with that first bite, Zara's world began to shift. Sarah had never been so confused. As she sat at the small table, staring down at the food the human captain had given her, she couldn't help but feel a strange sense of unease mixed with curiosity. She had expected the worst, perhaps some kind of cruel trick. But this wasn't it. The food was real. And the human had been kind. After taking the first bite, she hesitated. The food was surprisingly good. She had always imagined human cuisine to be bland and tasteless, but this was fresh and flavorful. The meat was tender, and the vegetables were crisp. It was almost comforting. It felt wrong, like she was betraying her instincts by enjoying it. But the hunger in her stomach won out, and she ate more. The human captain didn't say much as she ate, watching her carefully, his expression unreadable. His eyes weren't filled with malice, and there was no sign of the cruelty she had been warned about. Instead, there was something else in his gaze, something that Sarah couldn't quite place. It was a mix of curiosity and understanding. "Are you feeling better?" the captain asked after a long silence, breaking her concentration. His voice was calm, but there was a hint of concern in it. Zara nodded slowly, her mind still racing. "I suppose so," she replied cautiously, "but I don't understand. Why are you treating me like this? I was told humans would treat us like food, or worse." The captain raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback by her words. "You were told that?" he asked, his tone not angry, but more surprised. "That's what you were taught about us?" Sarah nodded, a cold lump forming in her throat. "It's what we all believe. You humans are ruthless, savage. We feared you." The captain looked down at the floor for a moment, as though thinking. When he looked back up, his eyes were softer, more thoughtful. "I understand why you would think that," he said quietly. "Our history is full of mistakes. We've made our share of terrible decisions, but that doesn't mean we're all the same. Not every human is the same, and not every human will treat you the way you expect." Zara frowned, not sure what to make of his words. She had never met a human like this before. All the stories, all the warnings, none of them seemed to match this man. There was no cruelty in his eyes, no trace of malice in his tone. But she couldn't forget who he was. He was still a human, the enemy. She couldn't let her guard down. "I don't trust you," she said bluntly, but her voice was quieter than before. "You could be lying to me. This could all be a trap. What do you want from me?" The captain sighed, running a hand through his short hair. He seemed to think for a moment before speaking again. "I don't want anything from you, Sarah. I'm not here to trick you, and I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here because I believe there's a chance for us to do something better, to find another way to solve this." Zara's brow furrowed in confusion. "Chance? What are you talking about?" He looked at her earnestly. "I know what your people think of us. I know how you see us, and maybe you're right to be cautious. But I'm offering you something different. I'm offering you a choice. You don't have to stay locked up in this room, alone and afraid. You don't have to be treated like a prisoner. You can choose what happens next." Zara stared at him, unsure of what to say. A choice. It didn't make sense. How could he be offering her a choice when she had no control? She was a prisoner. She had no power here. How could she make a choice? "Choose," she asked, her voice sharp. "What choice do I have? You're the one in control here, not me." The captain nodded, his expression serious. "That's true. But you're not just a prisoner, Zara. You're a person. You deserve to have a say in what happens to you, even if you don't think you do." Zara felt a strange emotion bubbling up inside her, something between anger and confusion. She had never been treated like this before. She had always been a warrior, a fighter. And yet here she was, sitting in front of a human, a supposed enemy, who was treating her with respect, offering her a choice. It didn't make sense. "I don't know what you want from me," Zara said, her voice a little quieter now. "What is it that you hope to gain from this? What's the point of offering me a choice?" The captain's eyes softened even more. "I want to show you that there's more to us than what you've been told. We're not all monsters, Zara. We don't all want to hurt you. Some of us want peace. And maybe we can find a way to make this work." Zara didn't know what to think. This human, this captain, was nothing like she had been taught to expect. She had been prepared to fight, to resist, to survive. But now there was a different possibility hanging in the air, a possibility she hadn't considered before. As she sat there, the weight of his words pressing on her chest, Zara knew one thing for sure: her life was about to change. But how, she wasn't sure. All she could do was wait for the next move. And for the first time since her capture, she felt a small flicker of hope. Zara sat in the small room, staring at the human captain, her mind in turmoil. She had always been taught to fear humans. Her people had whispered of their cruelty, their savage nature, and their hunger for domination. But everything she had learned in her life seemed to be crumbling in front of her eyes. This human was different. The captain had given her food, not as a trick, but out of genuine care. He had offered her a choice when no one else ever would. And his words, while puzzling, had begun to stir something deep within her. The way he spoke of peace, of understanding. Was it possible? Could humans really change? Could they be different from what she had been told? She had to admit, a small part of her wanted to believe him. She was used to violence, used to being prepared for battle. But this was something new, something she had never been trained for. How was she supposed to react to kindness when all she had known was suspicion and fear? Zara sighed, pushing the empty food tray aside. She looked at the door, wondering if she would be locked away again, or if she would be given another chance to speak with the human captain. The room felt smaller now, the air thicker with uncertainty. She had been a warrior her whole life, always in control, always ready for whatever came next. But now, for the first time, she didn't know what to expect. The door slid open again, and the captain entered, looking much the same as he had before, calm, focused, almost serene. He didn't seem to be in a hurry, nor did he look at her like an enemy. There was no judgment in his eyes. He stepped closer, sitting down on the small chair opposite her. He didn't say anything right away, and Zara didn't either. The silence between them felt strange, almost comfortable in a way that made Zara uneasy. Finally, the captain spoke. "I know you're still confused," he said, his voice steady but kind. "I can't blame you for that. You've been through a lot, and the last thing I want to do is make things harder for you." Zara crossed her arms, still wary but willing to listen. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice a little rough. "Why treat me like this? I'm your enemy. My people are your enemies." The captain's expression softened, and he leaned forward slightly. "Not every human sees you as an enemy, Zara. I don't. I see you as someone who has been forced into a war that doesn't have to happen. And I believe there's a better way." Zara blinked, taken aback. A better way. You're telling me you want peace. After everything that's happened. The captain nodded. Yes. Peace. I know it sounds impossible, but it's not. We're all just trying to survive, Shara. We're not so different, you and I. Zara's eyes narrowed, her mind racing. Survive, she echoed. My people were fighting for survival when we encountered your species. My fleet was wiped out. My crew is gone. My world, my people, are at risk because of humans. You expect me to just forget that and trust you. The captain's gaze didn't waver. No, I don't expect you to forget. But I do want to help you see that not all of us are the same. That's why I'm here. I'm trying to find a way to end this war. I want to offer you something different. Sarah scoffed, shaking her head. And what's that? A truce. A peace treaty. Her voice dripped with sarcasm. You can't just ask for peace after everything that's happened. The captain smiled softly, though his eyes remained serious. I know it's hard to believe, but sometimes peace can start with something small. A conversation. A moment of understanding. Zara's heart beat faster as she processed his words. Could it be possible? Could this human, who was supposed to be her enemy, truly be offering her a way out of the war? She wasn't sure. Everything inside her screamed that this was too easy, that peace couldn't just be handed over like a gift. But there was something in his words, something that made her question everything she had ever believed. She looked down at her hands, still bound by the restraints. She had been prepared to fight until the end, to survive no matter what it took. But now, in this moment with this human, she wondered if there could be another way. Could she find a way to live without violence? To find a path that didn't involve war? I don't know what to think, Shara admitted, her voice quieter now. I've been trained to fight, to survive, to kill. I don't know how to let go of that. The captain nodded, his expression sympathetic. I understand, and I'm not asking you to let go of everything right away. But maybe, just maybe, you can start by letting go of the idea that every human is your enemy. That's a start, don't you think? Zara stared at him, searching his face for any sign of trickery. But there was none. The captain was sincere. And for the first time, she felt a small shift in her heart. Maybe, just maybe, there was hope for something more. Maybe, she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. Maybe there is a way. The captain smiled, his eyes softening. I'm glad you're willing to consider it. Zara didn't know what the future held, but for the first time since her capture, she didn't feel entirely hopeless. The human had given her something more than food. He had given her a choice she had never thought possible. And for the first time, Sarah felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't entirely alone in the universe after all. Sarah sat silently in the small room, the weight of the captain's words still lingering in her mind. She had spent so many years preparing for battle, for conflict, that she had never considered another option. Now, as she thought about the possibility of peace, she found herself torn between what she had been taught to believe and the strange, unexpected kindness shown by the human captain. The door to her room slid open once more, and the captain entered, holding something in his hands. Sarah tensed for a moment, her instincts telling her to be cautious, but she quickly reminded herself that this was no longer the time to be on edge. She had to listen to what he was offering. The captain held out a small device, similar to a communicator but much smaller. This is a communication device, he explained. I'm giving it to you so that you can contact me directly if you need anything. It's a way for us to stay in touch in case you want to talk or ask questions. Zara stared at the device, unsure of what to make of it. A communication device. For her, was this part of some human trick? She had heard of humans using technology for surveillance and control, but the way the captain was offering it to her seemed genuine. He wasn't demanding anything in return, simply handing it over. Why are you doing this? She asked, her voice still laced with suspicion. Why are you helping me? The captain placed the device on the table between them, and sat down across from her. His eyes met hers with a quiet sincerity. "Because I believe that we can find a way to end this war. I believe we can find a way to live in peace, and I think you can be a part of that, Sarah." Zara's eyes narrowed. "A part of peace? What do you want from me? You've already given me food, a place to stay, and now this. Why would you keep offering me things without asking for something in return?" The captain's gaze softened, and he leaned forward slightly. "I'm not asking for anything in return. I'm offering you a chance to choose what happens next. I can't change the past, Tara, but maybe together we can change the future." Zara's mind raced. Everything she had been taught about humans told her that they were greedy, power-hungry creatures who would take advantage of any weakness. But the captain's words didn't match the stories. He wasn't demanding her loyalty or threatening her with punishment. He was offering her something different, an opportunity to make her own choice. She reached out slowly and took the communication device in her hands, examining it carefully. It was simple, sleek, and surprisingly well made. It didn't look like a tool of control. It looked like something a person might use in their everyday life. Something normal. "I don't know if I can trust you," Kara admitted, looking up from the device to meet the captain's eyes. "But I'm willing to try, to listen. But I need time to think." The captain nodded, his face calm and understanding. "Take all the time you need. I'm not rushing you. And if you ever need to talk, I'll be here. I'll be waiting." Zara hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. Her mind was still filled with doubts, with questions about what the human wanted and whether it was all some elaborate ruse. But a small part of her, something she hadn't felt in years, whispered that maybe, just maybe, there was more to this than she had been taught to believe. "Why do you want peace so badly?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "Why not just continue the war? Isn't it easier to keep fighting?" The captain thought for a moment before answering, his expression thoughtful. "I don't think peace is easy, Sarah. It's never easy. But I've seen enough destruction to know that war only leads to more destruction, more suffering, and I don't want that for anyone. Not for you, not for me, and certainly not for our people." His words hung in the air, and for a moment, Sarah could only stare at him, her thoughts racing. She had been prepared for a human to tell her that her people had to be conquered, that they had to submit to their superiority. But this human was different. He wasn't interested in conquest. He wasn't interested in victory at all costs. He seemed to truly care about finding a way to end the cycle of violence. Zara exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of his words settle over her. Could this really be possible? Could peace really be achieved between their species? She didn't know. But the more she listened to the captain, the more she felt a flicker of hope deep within her chest. Hope that maybe the war didn't have to continue. Hope that maybe they could build something better. As the captain stood up to leave, he gave her one last look. "Take care of yourself, Sarah," he said. "And remember, you don't have to do this alone. I'm here. Whenever you're ready, we'll talk again." Sarah nodded, her mind still in a whirlwind. But as the captain exited the room, leaving her alone with her thoughts, she felt something new, a small sense of peace. It wasn't a certainty, not yet, but it was the beginning of something that could change everything. For the first time since her capture, Sarah wasn't sure what the future would hold. But one thing was certain, she wouldn't face it alone. And that made all the difference. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty. Sarah spent her time in the small room, holding the communication device the captain had given her, her thoughts racing. She had never imagined herself in this position. A prisoner, yes, but a prisoner who was offered kindness, a prisoner with a choice. It was all too much for her to fully grasp. She tried to think of her next steps. Her people, her warriors, had always taught her to never trust humans. But here she was, slowly being forced to reconsider everything she had been taught. The captain had shown her no cruelty, only patience and an unwavering desire for peace. But peace was a fragile thing. Could it really be achieved? Could she trust the captain's words, or was she being lulled into a false sense of security? The more Xara thought about it, the more conflicted she became. Her instincts told her to remain vigilant, to guard herself from any potential harm. But there was also a small part of her, a part she had never listened to before, that whispered of possibilities beyond the battlefield. Could she learn to trust this human? Could she help bring about the peace he so desperately wanted? Xara had never been one to doubt her abilities, but this was different. This wasn't about combat. This was about something deeper, something more meaningful. It was about changing the course of history. It was about changing her own fate. The captain had told her to take her time, and that was exactly what she needed. Time to think, to process, and most importantly, to decide what kind of future she wanted to fight for. The future of war, or the possibility of something better. A soft knock at the door pulled Xara from her thoughts. She stood quickly, her hand instinctively reaching for the small weapon she had kept hidden in her clothing, but she stopped herself. The human had shown her no harm. Perhaps it was time to stop living in fear. Perhaps it was time to see what else the captain had to offer. "Come in," Xara called, her voice steady but guarded. The door slid open, and the captain entered. He smiled warmly at her, though there was a hint of concern in his eyes. "How are you doing?" he asked gently. Xara hesitated, studying him for a moment before responding. "I'm thinking. I'm trying to figure things out." The captain nodded. "I understand. It's a lot to take in." She nodded in return. "I spent my whole life believing that humans are a threat, that we were enemies destined to fight until the end. But you—" She trailed off, unsure of how to express the confusion swirling inside her. "You're different. Why? Why aren't you like the others?" The captain stepped closer, but not too close. He didn't want to make her feel trapped. "Not all humans are the same, Xara. Just like not all aliens are the same. We're all individuals. I've seen too much of the destruction caused by war, and I don't want to be part of that anymore. I don't want anyone to suffer, whether they're human or alien." Xara lowered her gaze to the ground. "I don't know if I can believe you. My people were attacked. My fleet was destroyed." The captain's expression softened, his voice gentle. "I'm sorry for what happened to your people. I'm not asking you to forget that. I'm asking you to think about what comes next. We can't change the past, but we can shape the future. Together." Xara felt a mix of emotions flood over her. Anger, sadness, confusion, but also a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The idea of peace, of something better than endless fighting, was a difficult concept for her to accept. But the captain's words, his sincerity, were beginning to chip away at her walls. She took a deep breath. "I don't know if I can help you," she said, her voice quiet. "But I'll listen. I'll think about what you've said." The captain smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "That's all I can ask. You don't have to decide everything now. Just take it one step at a time." Xara nodded slowly, still unsure of what to make of all this. She had never imagined a future where peace was even an option, but maybe, just maybe, it was possible. She didn't know how long it would take or what the road ahead would look like, but for the first time, she felt like there was something worth fighting for, something that wasn't about violence or war. The captain paused before turning to leave. "I'll be here whenever you're ready to talk, and if you need anything, anything at all, you just need to ask." Xara watched him go, the door closing softly behind him. She remained standing there for a few moments, her mind still whirling with the weight of everything. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about changing the world, changing her understanding of what was possible. She wasn't sure how this would end, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't do it alone. For the first time in her life, Xara considered the idea of hope. It felt strange, like a foreign concept. But as she stood in the quiet room, staring at the communication device on the table, she realized that this small, seemingly insignificant object represented something far bigger than just a tool to send messages. It was a symbol of possibility. A possibility that could change everything. Sarah sat in her quarters, the faint hum of the ship's engines vibrating through the walls. She stared at the communication device in her hands, her thoughts in turmoil. The captain's words echoed in her mind, challenging everything she had believed her entire life. She closed her eyes and exhaled deeply. For years, she had been taught that humans were monsters, cruel beings who sought to dominate and destroy. Yet here she was, on a human ship, being treated with respect and kindness. The captain's actions contradicted everything her people had drilled into her. But could she truly trust him? Her fingers hovered over the device. She could reach out to him, ask questions, demand answers. Yet fear held her back. Fear of betrayal, of being wrong, of opening herself up to vulnerability. Before she could decide, the door to her room chimed. She tensed but quickly composed herself. "Enter," she called out. The door slid open, revealing one of the ship's engineers, a young woman named Harper. Sarah had seen her in passing but never spoken to her. Harper carried a small tray with a steaming bowl of food and a pitcher of water. "Captain thought you might be hungry," Harper said with a smile, setting the tray on the small table. Her voice was soft but confident. "He asked me to bring this to you." Sarah eyed the food warily. It smelled pleasant, but she couldn't help but wonder if it was another test. "Thank you," she said cautiously, watching Harper's every move. Harper hesitated, as if sensing Sarah's unease. "Mind if I sit for a moment? I could use a break." Sarah hesitated, but eventually nodded. "Suit yourself." Harper pulled out a chair and sat down, her posture relaxed. "I know this must be strange for you. Being here, surrounded by humans." "You have no idea," Chara muttered, picking up the bowl and inspecting its contents. It appeared to be some kind of soup, filled with vegetables and chunks of meat. "Why are you being so kind to me? Why does your captain insist on peace?" Harper leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "It's not just about peace. It's about survival. The captain's seen what war does to people, human or alien. He doesn't want any more bloodshed if it can be avoided. And honestly, most of us feel the same way." Sarah narrowed her eyes. "Most of you?" Harper shrugged. "Not everyone agrees. Some still think fighting is the only answer. But those voices are getting quieter. People are starting to realize that we're stronger when we work together. At least, that's what I believe." Sarah studied Harper's face, searching for any hint of deception. But all she saw was sincerity. "And you think I can help with this alliance?" Harper smiled. "I think you're braver than you realize. The fact that you're even considering it says a lot." Sarah felt a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was close. She set the bowl down and leaned forward. "If I were to entertain the idea of peace, what would it look like? How would it work?" Harper's eyes lit up. "It starts with communication, understanding each other's cultures, needs, and fears. It won't be easy, but it's possible. And with someone like you, someone who's experienced the war firsthand, you could be a voice for change." Sarah frowned. "And what if my people don't listen? What if they see me as a traitor?" Harper's expression softened. "Change is hard. It takes time and courage, but sometimes all it takes is one person to start a movement. You might be that person, Chara." The weight of Harper's words settled heavily on Sarah's shoulders. She had always been a warrior, a fighter. But could she become something more? Could she be the bridge between two warring species? As Harper stood to leave, she placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Take your time. No one's rushing you. But just know, you're not alone in this. The captain believes in you, and so do I." Sarah watched Harper leave, her mind racing. The idea of being a voice for change was daunting, but it also stirred something deep within her, a purpose beyond the battlefield, a chance to build something instead of destroying it. She picked up the communication device and stared at it for a long moment. Then, with trembling fingers, she activated it. The captain's voice came through almost immediately. "Zara, is everything okay?" "I've been thinking," she began, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "If I were to consider peace, what would you need from me?" There was a pause on the other end, and she could almost hear the smile in his voice when he responded. "Your honesty, your perspective, and your courage. Together, we can figure out the rest." For the first time, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to take the first step. She didn't know what the future held, but she was willing to try. And sometimes, trying was the bravest thing of all. Sarah stood on the ship's observation deck, staring out at the endless expanse of stars. The galaxy stretched before her, a vast and untamed wilderness of light and shadow. For so long, it had represented danger, war, and survival. But now, for the first time, it felt like it held something more, possibility. She was no longer a prisoner in her mind, shackled by fear and propaganda. She was still wary, of course. Centuries of mistrust didn't vanish overnight. But something had shifted. Captain Hayes and his crew had shown her a side of humanity she had never thought existed. Kindness, patience, and a willingness to listen. And now, they were giving her the chance to speak. The sound of footsteps behind her broke her train of thought. She turned to see Captain Hayes, his expression calm but curious. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. Zara gestured to the empty space beside her. "It's your ship." He chuckled softly and stepped forward, hands clasped behind his back as he gazed out at the stars. "You've been quiet since our last conversation. I wanted to see how you were doing." "I've been thinking," she admitted, her voice steady, "about what you said, about peace." "And?" Hayes prompted, his tone careful and encouraging. Sarah took a deep breath. "I'm not sure I can convince my people. They've lived in fear of humans for so long. Even if I tried, they might see me as weak or worse, a traitor." Hayes nodded slowly. "Change is never easy, Sarah, but it starts somewhere. Even the smallest step can lead to something bigger." She frowned, her claws tapping lightly against the metal railing. "Why do you trust me?" "You have no reason to." "Because I see potential," Hayes replied without hesitation. "You're brave, intelligent, and capable of seeing beyond what you've been told. That's rare. And it's exactly what we need if we're going to end this cycle of conflict." Zara's gaze dropped to the floor. She wasn't used to being spoken to with such respect. It was disarming. "If I were to help," she said cautiously, "what would it involve?" Hayes turned to face her fully, his eyes steady. "We're heading to a neutral outpost, a place where discussions can happen without fear of attack. I'd like you to come with me, as an ambassador of sorts. Your perspective could be invaluable." Her first instinct was to reject the idea. The thought of standing before her people, or even other species, and advocating for peace felt overwhelming. But as she considered it, she realized she wanted to try. Not for Hayes, not even for humanity, but for herself. For the chance to be more than a soldier in a war she no longer believed in. "I'll do it," she said finally, her voice firm. "But on one condition." Hayes raised an eyebrow. "Name it. If this fails, if they don't listen, or if it puts your crew in danger, you won't hold me responsible." The captain nodded. "Agreed. But I have a feeling you'll surprise us all." The journey to the neutral outpost took several days. During that time, Sarah immersed herself in the ship's database, studying human history, culture, and diplomacy. She was amazed by the complexity of their species. For every act of violence, there was a story of compassion. For every war, a tale of rebuilding. Humanity, it seemed, was defined by its contradictions. Harper often joined her, offering insights and answering questions. The two women formed an unlikely bond, built on mutual curiosity and respect. Sarah began to see the crew not as enemies but as individuals, each with their own stories and struggles. When the ship finally arrived at the outpost, Sarah felt a mixture of nerves and determination. The station was a sprawling structure, floating like a jewel in the void. Its corridors were filled with beings from countless species, each representing their own interests and agendas. Hayes led Sarah to the meeting chamber, where representatives from both sides of the conflict were gathered. The tension in the room was palpable, the air heavy with distrust. As Kara stepped inside, all eyes turned to her. She felt the weight of their scrutiny, but forced herself to stand tall. Hayes began by introducing her, explaining her unique position and the importance of her perspective. Then he stepped aside, giving her the floor. Sarah took a deep breath and began to speak. She told her story, not just of her capture in time aboard the human ship, but of her own doubts and realizations. She spoke of the kindness she had encountered, the lessons she had learned, and the belief that peace was possible. "I know many of you see humans as I once did," she said, her voice steady, "as monsters, but I've seen another side to them. A side that wants to build, not destroy. If we continue down this path of war, we will all lose. But if we choose to work together, we might find a way to survive, together." The room was silent when she finished. She couldn't tell if her words had made an impact, but she had done her part. That was all she could do. As the discussions began, Sarah stepped back and let Hayes take the lead. She watched as he navigated the delicate negotiations, his calm demeanor and unwavering resolve earning the respect of even the most skeptical representatives. By the end of the day, there was no clear resolution, but there was something even more important, a spark of hope. A willingness to talk, to listen, to try. Back on the ship, Sarah sat in her quarters, reflecting on the day's events. When Hayes stopped by to check on her, she offered him a rare smile. "I still don't know if this will work," she admitted, "but it feels like a start." Hayes nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Sometimes that's all we need." As he left, Sarah turned her gaze back to the stars. For the first time, they didn't feel so cold and distant. They felt alive, brimming with possibility. And for the first time, Sarah felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be.